So it was not quite Elvis or the Beatles, but I did have to prepare my friend Marla in advance of Ben and my wedding weekend. As a nifty child of the 80s and 90s, I had to call her and say, look, I need you to know that Debbie Friedman is going to be at our wedding. She's going to song lead for our Shabbat dinner, and I need you to stay cool. Turns out, actually, that Debbie was not at our wedding. She was too sick that weekend to attend, and it was actually another guest who captured Marla's attention. But looking back, even now, it seems surreal that Debbie would have been there at all. Not Debbie's music, that would have made sense. It was a part of my Jewish life as long as I can remember it, long before I knew her name or owned that Live at the Dell cassette. Yes, cassette. It was actually only later, thanks to the yeches, the friendship from my in-laws, did Debbie herself become a part of my life. Speaking at a memorial service a year after her death, though I think it was a couple of months, one of my dearest friends and colleagues, Rabbi Leora Kay, spoke of her long and loving relationship with Debbie, who from her birth was her auntie and sometimes surrogate parent. It really did date back to her birth, which Debbie famously announced to all of Olansang Ruby Camp. For her eulogy that day, Rabbi Kay Leora wrote, Debbie and her music were there at nearly every big moment of my life. At my ordination, I chose her music to be played on an organ at Temple Emmanuel. Debbie was with us for our wedding weekend at camp, and she wrote a song for me and Doug, which she joyfully encouraged our guests to sing together. She was with us through the challenges of fertility, and then blessedly was with us for the naming of our daughter. Again, singing each time. It is one of the greatest joys for us, Leora wrote, that at just 8 days old, Galit was welcomed with the sweet, sweet voice of Debbie and her guitar. But she went on that day to say something else, something that rang true to me as someone even then far less connected to Debbie herself. Leora reminded us that the reason Debbie had such an effect on all of us was because she was there at all of our births, our namings, our weddings, funerals of our family members, our Havdalahs, our moments too. Leora said her voice, her music, her smile were there for everyone. It is somewhat inconceivable to me that it has been almost 15 years since Debbie died. I remember thinking as I watched her funeral and when I heard Leora's words that Debbie would not be there to welcome my children into the world. And I have sweet memories of sitting with her book, Lullaby, which was gifted to us at Jacob's birth by Debbie's beloved mother and sisters. We would read it, and little Jacob, and later Orly, would point at Debbie's picture and say, that's Saba's friend. Yehi zichra baruch, we say, may her memory be for a blessing. And tonight's melodies and the melodies of our lives make that true. Tonight, we honor Debbie's legacy. It seems fitting to me in ways I don't even completely understand somehow that it coincides with the early chapters of the book of Exodus, these stories in which women, including Debbie's own Miriam, take center stage. And this month, I try to imagine what she might have taught us in this moment as a new administration takes over, anxiously awaiting today the return of more hostages, her last home of Southern California aflame. I can't help but wonder what text she would have shared or what lyrics she might have given us for this moment. Originally, I told Rabbi Yoshi I would come tonight and offer maybe 3 lessons that I learned from Debbie, from her music more than anything. But as I sat down to write, I realized that all of them, each piece of text that she shared with us and that I thought I might share with you, boiled down to the very same lesson. She would stand before an audience and look at each and every person and say, I wrote this for you. And all these years later, I think I've started to understand why. Tomorrow morning, we read the second portion of the book of Exodus, Parashat Vayera. And in it, we are again reminded of the power and necessity of voice. The parasha opens again, like we read last week, with a moment of revelation. God reminds Moses first of the covenant with the ancestors, but then God repeats what we already know from last week. God says, V'gam ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael, asher Mitzrayim ma'avadim otam, ve'ezkor et briti. I have heard now, God says, the moaning of the Israelites because of the Egyptian bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. I thought to myself, I wrote this for you. Exodus begins with our voices. Even in the Torah, we are the catalysts for change, for freedom, for the world in which we want to live. The Torah states it here, but I realize I also, and maybe we also, learned it from Debbie, from her music and from watching her in front of a crowd, whether it was 5,000 people at a URJ biennial, or 100 people at a women's Seder in New York City, or probably 20 people at a small Havdalah service at camp. She would remind us, it's your turn now. So tonight we've heard a number of Debbie's melodies, and there's so many more. And while I think Miriam is the biblical character for whom she's probably best known, Miriam and her timbrels, I want to close tonight with Debbie's biblical namesake, Devorah, your Aunt Deborah too. It is, our rabbi's notes, no coincidence that there are only two narrative poems in Tanakh, Song of the Sea in the book of Exodus, which we celebrate in 2 weeks at Shabbat Shirah, and Deborah's song in the book of Judges, which forms the Haftarah that Shabbat. And Debbie, it turned out our Debbie, wrote songs for both of them. Through her story in the book of Judges, we meet Devorah as a judge, a warrior, an advisor, and an image I love, though maybe a little scary right now. It says a woman of flames. Devorah was a fighter and one who inspired. She was a woman unafraid to use her voice, her power, and her wits. The refrain of the song, the words of the Tanakh itself, and words that I forgot appear in Lecha Dodi also, teach us what to me is Debbie's central message, maybe the lesson I learned most from her. Arise, arise, Devorah. Arise, arise, and sing your song. Uri, Uri, Dabri Shir. So channeling her biblical namesake, the prophet in Israel, Debbie took all those words of Torah and encouraged us to all be like Devorah, to rise up and sing our song. And then, as Debbie also reminded us in one of her earliest songs, we can sing unto God a new song, and that song can be for change, for freedom, and for the world in which we want to live. As Debbie might have told us, it's your turn now. Shabbat Shalom.